Hello aspirants, looking at editorials and question bank for 18th November. The first editorial in the Hindu newspaper today is After the Storm. So this is regarding the storm after demonetization. So we have discussed demonetization quite often, almost every day in news. So here the specific points which are highlighted are: one, it says that much of India's economic activity still takes place in the informal sector, with no check payments being made, the banking transactions involved. So this results in widespread evasion of both direct and indirect taxes. So all these are going to come out in the open. That is one specific advantage of the monetization drive for sure. But then another thing which it highlights is that farmers' income is not taxed. But then they have also got Kisan credit cards. They have also established their no frills bank accounts. So all these initiatives which the government had launched have brought them also into the formal sector, and along with the other initiative, that is the goods and services tax. Once that is put into effect, then taxation at every stage, means from farm to fork, as it is said. So from the farmer's field to the fork and plate in your on your table, dinner table. So that whole thing will be taxed from the entire chain. So this will result in even the middlemen and how much profits do they accrue, that all will come out in the open. They will have to pay taxes. So this will also benefit the economy. Also the entire informal economy which is not calculated, that would also come into the calculations. Once it forms part of the formal economy, it will also boost the economic growth rate. So these are the benefits. The one point which is highlighted is that public healthcare infrastructure in India is very abysmal, very low. So people have to spend on healthcare from their pockets. So because of this demonetization drive, this section which has to spend on healthcare facilities is being affected, because public healthcare institutes are allowed to hospitals, public hospitals are allowed to take old currency, but then the private hospitals do not. So this is one aspect to be taken care of, the editorial says. And another is about the credit cards. When the government wants people to become part of the cashless economy, use banking transactions on credit cards, there are high transaction charges involved. So this is also a concern which has to be brought down. So that is about the editorial. The second one is a chance to recalibrate ties. So this is regarding India-Pakistan relations, and it talks about the 2003 ceasefire which had been put into effect along the LOC, has now been breached quite often, and there are cross-border firings along the LOC as well as international border. There is no communication between the two governments. So all such bilateral talks today have come to nil, except the exchanges which take place between the high commissions, the foreign ministries, through Dimash. So Dimash is a way in which a political initiative or action is communicated. So about the casualties caused because of these cross-border firings are intimated to the other side by both India and Pakistan. So this is the only communication presently taking place. So this is the situation between India and Pakistan, and it will have future implications. So peace in this neighborhood is quite essential, that we all agree. India has started surgical strikes. So one surgical strike which it did after Uri attacks keeps the possibility of future surgical strikes also taking place. Also we have seen in news that across the LOC, on the Pakistani side near the LOC, terrorist organizations are regrouping again. So this also questions about what will be the next step of the government of India now. So these are the issues. What it specifically talks of to, what we have discussed in news also, is the Heart of Asia initiative. So this we have done 1 or 2 days ago. So this is a conference which will take place on Afghanistan. So this takes place annually between the neighboring countries of, there are 13 nations part of this Heart of Asia initiative. So this has both India and Pakistan as members. Last year, the Heart of Asia conference took place in Pakistan, in Islamabad. India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj visited Islamabad, and this was in December 2015, and she talked about comprehensive dialogues being initiated between the two countries. So the relations were positive, and then in Jan 2016, the Pathankot attack took place, and that ended the relations. So the relations deteriorated since then. So presently also what we are seeing is the 2016 December Heart of Asia conference will take place in India in Amritsar. So the Pakistani foreign minister has said that he would be visiting. So we are looking forward to better relations between the two countries. The SAARC summit was cancelled. So presently it is expected that other countries would also want India and Pakistan to come together and work together. So we have to wait and watch what happens about this, because Pakistan is questioned by not just India but even Afghanistan and Iran on the terrorist organizations which it has in its country, which it does not act against, and which are causing terrorist operations in undertaking terrorist operations in both India and Afghanistan and also in Iran. So this is the pressure on Pakistan would come up again too in this conference. That is what is expected, and positive developments come through. Next, looking at the question bank. The lead article in today's newspaper is regarding Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the personality cult, and how there is no person challenging his authority presently in politics. So that is one article, not important from exam perspective. The article on perspective page is one of them is on India-China 1962 war and questions specifically why the Indian Air Force was not used during this war. So India-China 1962 war was suddenly declared by China, and it was ended also unilaterally by China when it retreated from the areas which had captured from on Indian territory. So this had shocked India, of course, and we were not prepared. Plus, by the time we had our Air Force prepared, there was no need because the war had ended. So both USA and the Soviet bloc came forward to help India. And Indian Air Force was developed to the extent that we were capable to counter the attacks during the 1965 India-Pakistan war. So this is said to be a blessing in disguise. Though 1962 India-China war is considered as a humiliating defeat of India, but it was actually a victory of Nehru's non-alignment policy when both sides came to help us. So that showed that non-alignment was successful. And plus it was a blessing in disguise because we benefited through that assistance in the 1965 war between India and Pakistan. So that is the point. Then another article in the Hindu newspaper is on national litigation policy and about government being a litigant in majority of the cases. And one more article is on India-Nepal relations. So there are two questions which we have framed for today. The first question is, government litigation reportedly constitutes nearly half of all litigation in the Indian judiciary. What are the reasons for the same? How can it be ensured that the government becomes a responsible and efficient litigant? So of course the article which came up was a little on the critical side, so there was not many points. So another article has also been used to frame this answer. Now the thing is that government is a litigant in almost half of all litigations in the civil cases. So this is, why is it so? Like we hear of various cases like the famous even Keshananda Bharti case. So Keshananda Bharti case versus the state of Kerala or Union of India. You hear of so many such cases. So this shows that the other side is government entity. So that means it is government is a litigant in the matter too. Sometimes it is also seen that on both sides government is the litigant. So many such cases also come forth, and it goes into appeal after appeals. Government side keeps on appealing. So what are the reasons for the same? We'll discuss this. So in one survey which was done in Karnataka, it showed that 65% of civil cases the government was a litigant, and sometimes on both sides too. So this was highlighted. It results, two negative aspects of it is that it results in an exchequer spending also. So it's a constraint on the public exchequer. Plus second thing is that it contributes to the judicial backlog as well. So on both these negative points, it is essential that this government acting as a litigant, this trend should come down. All have spoken about this. The Supreme Court has highlighted this since 1970s. The Law Commission has come up with reports on this. The government, former UPA government, came up with a full national litigation policy in 2010, which this whole article actually criticizes, but that cannot be a main answer. So there are other points also added here. And finally, even in October 2016, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also spoke about this issue, that government is a major litigant in many cases in India. So that is the concerns being raised. Reasons why government is a litigant in many cases. So the reasons highlighted are, one is that litigation is the way in which the officers take ahead the matter. So these litigation cases are related to matters related to land, acquiring of land, acquisition of land and the compensation which is paid for it, for violation of Motor Vehicles Act, for even insurance being claimed by the people, about labor disputes. So all such cases where the administrative should give redress the grievances, rather than that cases are taken ahead. So even for farmers, for meager prices which they want for their land, litigations are filed and cases are fought in the judiciary. So this is what we see. We have discussed earlier, if you remember, about a question in Question Bank in October about morale of soldiers in the army, and there was an article which spoke about the disabled soldiers and how they fight cases, and government is the litigant on pensions. So for meager pensions and benefits, they fight cases and government keeps on appealing them. So that was also one example which links us to this article too. So now presently these are the reasons why this litigation takes place is in all these matters, is because there are three reasons highlighted. One is lack of accountability of the officer in whom the power has been vested. So there is no accountability on him. He has to do something about a particular demand which has come before it, but the government does not want to accept it, so it takes forward and files a case. So he is not accountable. Nobody is going to question him. He knows. So this is the way they go ahead. So bringing in accountability would also bring in litigations down. That is one thing. We'll discuss it in the later points about results framework document 2. So we'll see this. That is one reason. Second reason is that the litigation go ahead because then the official feels that the opposite party which is there against whom the government is filing the case or fighting a case, that will eventually see the utility of this whole exercise and grease the palms of this officer. So corruption will take place. He will pay the money and let the case end rather than spending money on the fighting a case. So that is another corruption related angle too. And the third reason which is said is that it is a tendency that it goes on. Once the litigation has been filed, then again an appeal. If the case goes against government, then government files an appeal in higher court. They go up to Supreme Court too, the highest authority too, for meager amounts. So that shows irresponsibility of these officers as well. So this is also a way of delaying decision making. They don't want to decide on a matter, rather than leave it on the court and about going on in appeals after appeals. Finally, they will not have to decide on the matter and take the responsibility. So these are the three reasons highlighted. The policy which has come up is National Litigation Policy of 2010. So the article actually criticizes it, saying that it talks about high objectives to be attained, but there is no way which has been decided how would it go ahead, and there is a lot of ambiguity in the policy. So it talks of even the major point which is there is it is not clearly known. There is no statistics about in how many cases government is a litigant in India. So an exact figure for this is also not known. So it says this is the starting point, that at least statistics should be there about cases, and then actions can be taken on them. So there are initiatives taken. We'll talk about them. So these are the initiatives you can see. So states are asked to encourage arbitration and mediation. So arbitration, mediation is that if there are two parties involved and if there is an agreement or contract too, it is required that arbitration clause should be essentially there. That if there is a dispute, they would not go directly to the courts, but first try to settle it through arbitration and mediation. So this is one point. So even in other cases too, it can be put into effect. So this is there. Second is there is a target set for each government department to reduce the number of cases which they have with them. So this will be done through results framework document, as I said. So bringing in responsibility. So what is a result framework document? You can see here. It is a record of understanding between the minister and the secretary of a particular department. So the political head and the administrative head have an agreement. This is called result framework document. So through this, the responsibility of both is understood, and the secretary then has a clear responsibility. So based on which it will have to take action. Then it is accountable. Then the next point under national litigation policy is regarding meeting of secretaries, both at central level and state level, to review implementation of this policy. There is a directive to set up empowered committees at both central level, state level, as well as district levels. It asks all departments to have a clear database on all the cases in which it is the litigant, and it wants category wise database distribution, district wise distribution on the pendency of cases, which should be made available to this empowered committee too. So these are the provisions. Then it says excessive litigation prone sectors have to be identified and special focus should be put on them. And law departments should also convene meetings regularly to weed off such cases which are infructuous. Infructuous means having no substance in it and they should be ended in a fixed timeline. Even the law ministry has suggested that the present 15 years which a case involving a government litigant takes has to be reduced down to 3 years now. So this is also on agenda. So the national litigation policy has been framed, but this whole article criticizes it because of lack of objectivity, clarity on the matter. So it talks of some points which need to be highlighted because a new national litigation policy is bound to come up now with the new government. So it should have clear objectives. The role of different functionaries must be enumerated. Minimum standards for pursuing a litigation must be listed out. There should be accountability mechanisms in place. There should be consequences of violation of this policy also listed out. So with this and periodic impact assessment, it can be ensured that a national litigation policy is framed effectively and implemented with the same effect. So this will ensure a solution for this problem. Next, we look at the next question, which is based on India-Nepal relations. The question is, India-Nepal relations have undergone a turbulent phase in recent times. What were the reasons for the same? How far have relations normalized now? So, India-Nepal relations turbulence period was during the time of adoption of the Constitution of Nepal, which was newly framed after more than 7 years of debating and discussion on a constitution. So it was in September 2015 that this new constitution was adopted and protests started. The protest started in Nepal by the Madhesis. So these Madhesis is a group of population which is more Indian looking, and they live in the plains. They live in the Terai plains. If you look at India-Nepal map too, this is Nepal. This is the border with India. Terai is this region. Can you see Terai here? So this Terai region is the plain region, and the remaining upper part is the Pahadi region, mountainous region. So people living in this Terai region are of various communities. Prominent community here is Madhesis. They constitute 50% of the total population of Nepal, and they are more Indian looking, and the Pahadi people are having those typical Nepali features. So they are called indigenous or of Nepali descent. So even in the constitution they have been so recognized, and the population of this Terai region is more, but overall the geographical area is quite less. So this is sparsely populated and this is densely populated region, and the constitution divides seats on the basis of geographical area. So of course it will cause heartburn to these people who are demanding their right place in the constitution. Comprising 50% of the population in the parliament, they are getting only 39% of the seats. So these are their demands, plus even the divisions which have been made for constituencies being formed and elections taking place are done in such a way that in constituencies Madhesis are divided. So they become a minority. They don't get full possession control over that region as such, because then the candidate which they want to elect can come to power. So this also division of the population in these constituencies is also protested against. So they want changes in the constitution on as per their demands. So to ensure that the demands are met, they started protests. So these protests which they started was by blocking the trade passage for the trucks which take economic commodities into Nepal. So Nepal, you can see, is a landlocked country. It is surrounded by India. All three sides it is surrounded by India, and here is China. And this is a region again where China can access Nepal, but Nepal has been predominantly India's neighborhood. It has open boundaries with India. So even people from Nepal, if you look at even the criteria for applying for UPSC examination. You can even be a citizen of Nepal or Bhutan to become an officer in India and appear for civil services exam. Except IS, IPS, you can get into services to IS, the top services. So these open borders policy has been there for long, and it depends majorly for all its communities for trade with India. So trade with India is the backbone of the entire economy of Nepal to survive. So when these trade routes were blocked, Nepalese population suffered. They suffered heavily. And Nepali government then was Prime Minister KP Oli. He pointed fingers at India. And this is on the behest of India, by support from India, that these protests are taking place. Though India denied any involvement, and they wanted the concerns of the Madhesi population, of course, to be taken into consideration. But this India showed its helplessness, that since these protesters are blocking the route, then they are helpless too. So the Indians are helpless too. So whatever the truth of this matter, but now the issue has come to the fore. The KP Oli government also fell. So even for that, he said it was a conspiracy by the Indian government which has led to the fall of government in Nepal. So this also was because of which the relations between India and Nepal suffered. Then eventually, after KP Oli's fall, a government has come up which is a joint government of Nationalist Congress, Nepali Congress, and Maoists. So it was Maoists who 7 years ago had given up arms and joined into mainstream politics. The main leader is Pushpa Kamal Dahal, also known as Prachanda. So he has become the leader of this Maoist party, and he is also one prominent political party in Nepal. So these two have come together and decided to be in power for 9 months, supporting each other. So 9 months Prachanda would be the Prime Minister, and for the next 9 months Nationalist Congress, Sher Bahadur Deuba, will become the Prime Minister. Nepali Congress will become the Prime Minister for 9 months, and after that, in January 2018, fresh elections would take place under the new constitution. They are also talking of how to resolve this issue of the Madhesis. So they are also taking into consideration the demands and how the number of parliamentary seats from Terai can be resolved. So this issue has been tried to be resolved in January 2016. So the population aspect, that division of seats will be as per population and not as per geographical area. This provision has been accepted. So that is there, but other issues which are there about constituencies, they are still simmering, and Madhesis are still not satisfied with their complete demands being met. So the issue is still simmering, but the relations have improved with the new Prachanda government. Also, he visited, Prime Minister of Nepal visited India. So that was there. Even recently, in November itself, Pranab Mukherjee, the President of India, visited Nepal. So we are trying to normalize relations now. So of course, Nepal says that India should not interfere in its internal matters, and India says that it should uphold democracy and the aspirations of all sections of the population. So Nepal is also advised by India. Even when President Pranab Mukherjee went to Nepal, he highlighted the historic relations between India and Nepal, Buddhism being one major factor connecting the two countries too. So cultural linkages are there. Even the Nepalese population and the support which India gives to them, the hydroelectric projects which India undertakes in Nepal. Also, Gurkhas form a major part of, form a significant part of Indian armed forces. Also, there are 32,000 Gurkhas currently serving in the Indian Army. There are 1,26,000 pensioners from the armed force who are Gurkhas of Nepali origin. So these people are also being given improvised pensions as per the OROP. So there are benefits and very many welfare schemes which are being implemented in Nepal as well for this ex-servicemen, the pensioners. So this is also highlighted. So again, another thing which during the President Pranab Mukherjee's visit was finalized was that Nepali students can also appear for the entrance exam for IITs. So this has also been opened up for them. So we have open door policies with Nepal. So the improvisation of relations is good for both the countries, because when we saw that when India intentionally or unintentionally, because of its helplessness, had trade relations blockage, trade blockade here, China came ahead and supported Nepal. It provided it transit routes and provided it economic commodities, food grains, on essential commodities to Nepal. So this is also not good for India because China is also in the neighborhood. So India-Nepal good relations are of course significant. So this is the article and the discussion on this question. So that is it for today. You can download the PDF file from the website, the link for which is provided in the description. Thank you so much.